Good evening, dear viewers. You're watching the special edition of Kanasi Nainasi, presented to you by the Frontier Manipur in association with Salai Taret. Tonight, we will be deliberating on frontier and freedom of expression. Now, by the term frontier, here means the marginalized people living in the peripheral area, whose rights are suppressed, whose voices are muzzled. Now, journalists working in these peripheral areas are not an exception. Even they are also subjected to different kinds of harassment, different kinds of intimidation, physical assault, incarceration, etc. Therefore, it now appears that the universal fundamental rights of freedom of expression and speech are infringed upon by those in power to silence dissenting voices. Therefore, we are talking about repression especially against media fraternity, the shrinking democratic space, and of course the challenges and the threat of free speech. Joining us on the show tonight are Mr. Tilman Ward's Assistant Director, Culture Counts Foundation, Germany. Tilman was reporting from several crisis regions and currently is working on constructive and positive journalism. Good afternoon and welcome to the show, Tilman. Next, we have an independent and fearless journalist who is also a staunch advocate of free speech in India. She is none other than Geeta Seshu, a representative of a Free Speech Collective. Welcome to the show, Geeta. We also have Tamo Yambam Lava, an epitome of investigative journalism in Manipur, and who is also an institution in himself, a senior journalist and also former acting chairperson of Manipur Human Rights Commission. Welcome to the show, Tamo.
Thank you.
We also have an internationally renowned human rights activist who has relentlessly campaigned for human rights, Tamo Bablu Loitongbam, Director, Human Rights Alert, Manipur. Welcome to the show, Tamo. And we are also very fortunate to have the editor-in-chief of the Frontier Manipur, Tamo Sadopam Dhiren. Welcome to the show, Tamo. First of all, I would like to come to Geeta Seshu, because as you see that there is an increasing trend of attacks on journalists. If I have to mention some recent incidents, of course, there are 6 journalists, I believe, booked under sedition in Uttar Pradesh very recently. So my question to Geeta is, how do you perceive the rising attack on the media fraternity across the country now?
About this issue of an undeclared emergency, yeah, I know we all use it and, it's become a kind of catchword. But frankly, I think we've gone way beyond just the formal declaration of an emergency. We are seeing a very, very systematic breakdown of justice delivery mechanisms. And not just a breakdown, but a complete negation, a neutralization of justice delivery, which is where impunity plays such a big role, where you have police officers, where you have law enforcing agencies and district level or administration, and the nexus between all these 2 agencies of the state with business, petty business or local politicians who contribute to the kind of silencing of journalists or of people who speak up. So then we run to, justice delivery mechanisms, and there also we do not face any kind of, we do not get any kind of relief. So that is the biggest challenge actually. In an emergency, in the declared emergency that we did go through, our country did go through, there was a suspension of all of these, of all of our civil liberties. Whereas here, it's not a question of a suspension so much as a negation, as a neutralizing. So the civil liberties exist on paper. They exist as a structure, but they are not structures that deliver or mechanisms that deliver. So we're in a much more serious situation, really.
Now let me come to Tamu Bablu. First of all, as you are from human rights activism sort of field, my first question is, what is freedom of expression? And how should I ask, from the human rights perspective, how do you take the incidents of attack or incarceration or even detention of journalists happening here in Manipur? What is your view about the recent happenings?
Well, freedom of expression is basically a right for you to express yourself. Well, there are different schools that explains this theoretically. Like the American school thinks that it is basically an innately rooted in the human nature, and therefore it comes out, freedom of expression is seen more as an expression of human nature, whereas a slightly more conservative approach or the school in Europe is seen more as a way to communicate among people, and therefore harmful kind of exchanges like pornography or hate speech needs to be properly controlled for freedom of expression to be exercised. In India's context, we have Article 19(1) of the Constitution, where again the freedom of expression and freedom of speech is very clearly protected, saying that this is a right which is given to all the citizens. All citizens shall have the right to freedom of speech and expression. So it's not just speech alone, but it could be an artistic expression, it could be in writing. And the work of journalism, of course, is about reporting the reality that the journalist sees to the rest of the world. So it's become an extremely important role that they play in the exercise of this right. However, in clause 2, again, of the Constitution of India, there are certain restrictions that are given to these rights in terms of national security or public order. The key question is, how is this restriction being exercised? On the one hand, you have a state which is so powerful, it has unbridled power over the citizen, and the constitutional scheme is that the rights, the fundamental rights of the citizen should be protected from the arbitrary exercise of power by the government, and freedom of expression or freedom of speech is of that kind where the state ought to respect, the state has an obligation to respect this right. The state should restrain themselves. It's not something which the state give to the people, but it's something that the state has to respect. They don't touch this part. Again, if you look at even international law, we have over and above the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights also very clearly lay out what freedom of opinion, freedom of expression, and even the right to information, to seek, to receive or impart information are again very clearly laid out by the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. And it says specifically, you mentioned frontier, the word frontier is there in the, irrespective of the frontier. It's not about whether you are a citizen or a non-citizen, whether you are from in this side of the border or that side of the border, whether you are in a city or you are a journalist or a non-journalist. This is a right that is available irrespective of frontier. So it is, I think, quite important for us, for people who have been for a long time subjected to all kinds of repressive regimes, repressive laws. I think it is important for us, for people in Manipur, to assert that we have as much freedom of rights, freedom of expression as anybody else in the country, and for that matter anybody else in the rest of the world, and therefore journalists in Manipur ought to be protected like anybody else. And the recent example of where you yourself was in trouble along with Paujal Chauba, I think are very clear examples that there is a need for protecting journalist who is in the business of receiving information, imparting information, and disseminating information. I think the protection of people who are professionally engaged in this becomes all the more important in trying to protect our freedom of opinion and expression. So there are mechanisms today over and above what Geeta and all had just mentioned about what they are doing. There are also in the United Nations the Special Rapporteur on freedom of opinion and expression, who gather information from all across the world and submits reports to the Human Rights Council and enunciating how this exercise is being exercised in different parts of the world, how there are repressions in different parts of the world, and what can be done by the United Nations Human Rights Council and various other agencies to ensure that this right is protected. Because this is a very critical freedom. Like there are three fundamental freedoms. They call it the freedom of expression, freedom of association, and assembly. So unless and until freedom of expression is respected, democracy and human rights would be totally meaningless, and therefore it plays a very central role. And it's unfortunate that we are seeing a gradual degeneration of the protection of this right, despite of being a part of the Constitution, despite of several very progressive judgments by the Supreme Court, where they interpreted that sedition should be only when there's a direct connection between what is being talked about and violent incitement of violence. The problem with application of law in India is that it's very selective, and very often the executive or sometimes the head of the government exercise so much discretion. They use this kind of restrictions on laws like sedition, in a very convenient way to serve their political purposes. So long as your political objective is served, then you let go, let people speak what they want to speak. But if there is something that comes against their political interest, then they make a very strong, harsh interpretation of it and try to clamp down opposition or alternative voice. So sometimes it is more our freedom of expression seems to be our freedom to conform to the official line rather than to challenge the official line. So this is the fundamental problem that I see in Manipur as well as in the rest of the country.
Okay, so rise to freedom of speech and expression, as Tamabulu has just mentioned, that it's not a right given to the citizen, rather it's a right that should be respected by those in power, by those in authority. Very good point there. Now, yes, as we are talking about respecting the right to freedom of expression, I would like to go to the chief editor of the Frontier Manipur, Tamodhiren Sadopam, who has recently been detained arbitrarily. And he is just out of the crisis. So we would just like to know your reaction about the whole ordeal that you went through in just a couple of weeks ago.
Casey, what has actually happened to our executive editor, Paujal Chauba, and I are already in the public domain. And to be very honest, I don't want to rerun the whole episode. However, what we have learned from this episode is that there has been unprecedented concentration of power in the hands of few, or rather in the hands of one, in the case of our state Manipur. Moreover, what we have experienced over the years, particularly the regime in India, has been compelled by overemphasized nationalist missions in the garb of attaining political or quote-unquote democratic objectives. And the regime in India has adopted both observable and unobservable tactics to silence the voices of not only dissent, but also rational criticism of issues confronted by the citizens. and that is, I think, palpable. I mean, anybody can see it. What has attracted the attention of informed citizens, both in Manipur, in the rest of India, as well as around the world, is that regimes across the world, both national, international, as well as here in Manipur, are very serious about curtailing human rights and freedom of association and belief, and the freedom of peacefully expressing one's own views, which might have a different perspectives or different take on issues that is closer to their hearts. And what is happening now is that the freedom of press, regardless of the views communicated, has faced the maximum brunt of the repressive regime. I say it is repressive for the simple reason that because they always adapt to the tactics of suppression and repression. The current national and state regimes, through their actions, have converted laws into instruments of oppression and suppression of freedom of speech. The Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, which was slapped on us, are primarily, or was rather primarily, uh, aimed at combating terror and to proscribe identified organizations. However, with the amendment in July 2019, it has been used, this particular law has been used to proscribe individuals and their activities by paving the way to pick individuals as terrorists, even though they may not have any affiliation with any of the so-called identified organizations, banned organizations referred to the First Amendment of the very act. The provisions of this oppressive act in the recent past has been used against those people who are known to have picked up certain kind of issues with the state or the practice of the state, which they think is ethically not right, which they think is constitutionally not right. It is also has been used against those who foster the cause of civil rights and many others who oppose the government and its policies. I think that is what I want to put across as of now.
As we have just listened to our chief editor on what he went through recently about this arbitrary detention, he mentioned about the curtail of freedom of expression and speech in Manipur too. Now let me go to Tillman. Tillman, I just want to know what is your perception? How do you take, the attack, the assault, or the incarceration, or intimidation, or sort of any harassment meted out to the journalist, especially in India? You might have heard a lot of news, wherein the Indian journalists are subjected to some sort of arbitrary detention, slapped with the sedition charges and all those things. So, how do you take this from the global perspective?
Well, I would say that it is clear now that journalists are not just observers, but they increasingly get also under attack. If I take, for example, the figures from Reporters Without Borders for 2020, for now, right now, in this moment in the world, there are 269 journalists in prison, as far as the organization has been got information about. And not to forget also independent bloggers or citizen journalists. There are 120 bloggers and citizen journalists in prison right now. So I would say this is a figure which should be taken seriously, and we should be aware that there must be support for those under attack. One success lately was the trial against Julian Assange, where the question was if he should be extradited to United States. But this was successfully avoided. And now the question is how the trial is going to continue. But we see how thin is the line. If Julian Assange would be extradited to United States, he might spend 175 years in prison because for some people he seems to be a traitor. On the other hand, for a great public, he's not a traitor, but a person who did a very important job to shed light on war crimes. So it can have very serious consequences on journalists if they're considered what they are, independent observers and reporters, or if they are suspected to do something else. So I would say we're in a moment where we should be aware that journalists can become under attack, and if journalists become under attack, democracy is under attack, and free public speech is under attack.
Okay. The other thing is, Tilman, we have heard that you have done a lot on constructive and positive journalism. So what actually is constructive or positive journalism, and how do you promote constructive and positive journalism in conflict-ridden society?
Yeah, it has been a much discussed term lately, at least here in Europe. It's important to note constructive journalism is not another form of journalism, but I would say it just emphasizes that there might be some questions journalists should ask more frequently. For example, we could, after analyzing problems and criticizing bad situations, we could also ask more frequently what we can do now. So who are the people who promote change? Who are the people who try to solve the problem? So let's say it's a vision where you also focus on potentials and not just on deficits. How to promote it? For example, we did a project about conflict zones where we didn't just focus on the parties, the armed parties in armed conflict, but also on peace builders in these conflict zones. So people who try to promote reconciliation and stabilize communities and develop new visions of a common future. We did this in different conflict zones. So what was important for us was to see that if we look what the civil society is doing, we might get very interesting, important stories apart from the struggles in politics. But if we get a broader vision of what politics might be, that it might not just be what politicians do and militaries do and rebels do, but also what civil society is doing, and look around us what efforts they are having every day in promoting peace and stability, then we might get ideas what sort of stories we could cover and get also more optimism that some things can be done even in very difficult situations. So this is, let's say, an attitude of solution-oriented or constructive journalism, to always look at persons doing something. We might also look to abroad, to other countries which faced similar situations as in one particular region. So we could get inspiration of how people were doing things in similar situations.
And all those things. So yes, I'm quite sure that, of course, all this will definitely have a very bad repercussion for those perpetrators. I believe that. Let me come to Tamu Yambim Labab, as he is, of course, you are a renowned journalist working in the field for the last 35 years. As a very senior journalist, I would like to know, what do you feel when you read news wherein your colleague or a journalist being detained or being arbitrarily arrested or was even released without being produced in the court? So, I mean, all those norms are floated. So, how do you take it? What do you think about what's happening in Manipur now?
Okay, thank you. Listen, I have, in my 40 years of journalism, I have never been arrested by the Manipur State Police
Okay.
or have been detained by any of the Indian agencies. Okay, but I was arrested by the Burmese military regime in Burma in 1988 when the pro-democratic movement started rising.
Okay.
It was August 88 was when they launched the thing. I think I was arrested because when I read in the newspaper that 2 Japanese journalists were trying to cross into Burma from Thailand side and they were arrested. So I said, what the hell is happening? Journalists from Japan is coming to Thailand to cross into Burma. I am sitting here 100 kilometers away. Why should I remain silent? So I went in, sneaked in and all that. And then finally when I also climb mountains and you require a proof picture. So I took a proof picture in front of a government looking building. I said to prove the point that I was there, okay? And then that was it, I was caught, okay? Now how I got out of it is a different story altogether. I was released late in the night, but then I understood what it was like to be arrested, but not by the Indian or the Manipur police, but by the Burmese military regime police, okay? Where you don't have any words. If you're put into insane jail, only the man who put you into the jail can come and release you. See, that's kind of a situation which Burma was in, which is now, of course, must have changed. Then second time I was detained was in Bangkok International Airport because I was carrying an Indian passport. They looked at my face, they looked at the Indian passport. I said, no, you cannot be Indian. So they came, they scanned my passport and all that. So these are only 2 incidents. Okay, now listen, the recent incidents of arrests of journalists, etc., is very disturbing. I mean, not only in Manipur, but to begin with, renowned international journalists like Rajib Sardesai has been booked, I believe, and then 6 other journalists have also been arrested and charged with sedition.
Sedition, yes.
Okay. But that is a bigger national issue. But here in the frontier state of Manipur, because we are in a frontier, we feel a pinch more. The laws that apply in the rest of the country apparently does not seem to apply here, which is both a state as well as a journalist union itself. Okay. Now, when a union member gets arrested or harassed, it is the duty of the leadership of the union to come and protect him and support him and say no to the perpetrators of the crime. And to say whatever they may have done, we will come and negotiate. Okay. Now, recently you yourself was arrested. Okay. You were detained under the National Security Act for a Facebook post. Now, I do not understand how the 4 founding fathers of the Indian Constitution could have conceived or perceived the thought that 72 years later, a Facebook post can pose to be a threat to the country's integrity and sovereignty. You see, and these are larger questions that has to be dealt with. You see, how can a Facebook post, in which you may have used unsavory words, that I don't know, but that is your individual. You may be a maverick then. Okay, I will call you a maverick journalist, but then we have a maverick politician also. Okay, now. The point is that at that moment of time, the union justified the action of the government, saying that no, we cannot protect him because he was warned by us not to write something or not to say anything like that. Now, how can this happen? I mean, it can only happen in Manipur. Many things happen in Manipur, because I used to call it as a functional anarchy. But the fact that journalists themselves would react in a manner in which the government would be reluctant to, where idiots or devils storm into areas where angels fare to tread. That kind of situation is what I thought was happening in Manipur. I want to record having gone to the journalist union meeting, and I said the act of the government and the act of the union are to be condemned straight away. Okay.
Exactly, yes.
Now, in the recent case, it is very unfortunate is the word I use, because the Right Honourable Chief Minister, he himself was a president of the union, of All Manipur Working Journalists Union. He himself was an editor. He himself had been arrested and charged with sedition. And then the public and the union, everybody backed him, and he came out to a hero's welcome and won the elections in 2002. Okay. Now that is the kind of thing he should not forget. But a metamorphosis seems to have taken place after he became Chief Minister. His inability to take in dissent. Okay. Anybody saying anything, any Facebook post or any article, whether on the net or on print or through cable or TV, cannot be tolerated if it is even an iota is critical of him. You see,
Exactly.
this I think is a very, very dangerous phenomenon. Okay, maybe he does not have good advisors. Okay, because I have for 40 years I have written scathing articles and I have written scathing reports on chief ministers after chief ministers. Okay, I wrote a very scathing article piece on Rishank Singh when he was chief minister. And I thought, my God, if anybody writes against me, I will not slap a case against me. I'll just go and thump him, So next day I met him. And there was some journalist who had come from Calcutta. I said, let's go and meet Uzari Shank. I said, listen, I wrote a very nasty article on him yesterday. And I don't think he'll be very pleased to see me. He said, come. So I went. And you know what that old man told me? He said, son, do not write just like that. That's all that he said. Even though in Manipuri, but in Manipuri it's much more pleasant to say. But in English he says, son, do not write just like that. Okay, that was all that he said. Okay, there was no thing. But then again later on, when it became an issue, it was a Naga versus Meitei kind of issue I wrote, and he called his Advocate General, Sri Tamo Ashok Posamam, who later became a judge of the Guwahati High Court. And he says, I want to arrest Yamem, put him under detention. I want to send Yamem Lava to jail because he's writing things which is not good for any community and all that.
Okay.
So you know what Ashok Posamam told him? As a good advice, he says, sir, do not arrest him. If you arrest him now, he'll become more popular. And maybe he'll come out in some elections. He'll become more popular and he'll become more uncontrollable.
Okay.
So that is what I think, what Honorable Chief Minister is lacking. He requires good advisors to lead a good government. So his advisors, I don't know if it is his arbitrary decision of his own to go and think to have these people put on. But this recent case of Paujal Chau is very, very interesting because B.R. Ambedkar, the father of the Indian Constitution, would be rolling in his grave now. Chief Minister of an Indian state would roll in the role of the legislature, the judiciary and executive all onto himself. See, the fact that Chauba and Sadokam Dhiren should be arrested, it was taken by him as a legislative member of the legislature. Okay? And as a member, and he gave the command to the executive, swung into action, put it behind bars. But then, the Constitution does not give him the judiciary, power of the judiciary, And apparently, the union, instead of staging a protest, I mean, there are numerous protests have been staged, insurgents killing journalists. We have had protests marked in front of the Sambar Powerhouse and various other areas. Okay. Now, instead of doing a protest, the union president went and hopped off with the chief minister. He, as a president of the Old Manipur Working Journalists Union, he was the man who should have spurred the members of the union to come, our member has been threatened and he's been detained. We must protest against it. Then they came to Chauba and asked him to write a letter, not a letter of apology, but a letter to the extent that he does not know the contributor personally. Now that letter was delivered to the Honorable Chief Minister and then he was released. How can a person who has been behind bars for more than 24 hours be released at the order of the Chief Minister? Before the magistrate. That has not been done.
Okay.
Now, I think it is here that I would not hesitate to call All Manipur Working Journalists Union. Underneath, you can write a government of Manipur undertaking. A union is formed to protect the interests of the members, and the members are journalists. The journalists are the fourth pillar of society of the state, of the government. Now, this aspect, I think the union leaders have forgotten altogether, and instead they are using it to hop dog and I mean the union exists not only to ask for to garner thikas or to garner contracts or to secure employment of their nears and dear ones, but I think the fundamental reason why the journalists union exists seems to have been lost amongst the present leaders of all Manipuri Working Journalists Union, and I will not hesitate to once again reiterate that OAM, WJU, a government of Manipur undertaking.
Undertaking. Okay. Well, that's a very valid point, I think, put forward by the senior journalist here. Because it is the responsibility of the union, if there is any sort of detention or any harassment, they should proactively, I'm not asking them to protest, but at least should have condemned. That's what Tamulava wants to point out, and therefore he is saying that the AMJU, I'm not saying that, but Tamulava has just said that AMJU is an undertaking, government's undertaking. That's its point. I don't know how, true, how relevant that is, something that we have to see.
No,
but
I forgot
that's what we feel as
Okay,
of now.
I forgot one point, because following his arrest, Paujal Chawba was stripped of the membership of the Working Journalists Union, and it was followed by the Directorate of Information Public Relations withdrawing his press identity card. I mean, that's not mere coincidence. The union must have been told by the boss, Inko Hatado. Once it is hut out, he's been kicked out of the union, he automatically loses his membership card, because you need to be a member of the union to become a member, to hold a press card. No? So that's why I said that you have had corporate magnates trying to control their company unions through infiltration and all. But here I think it is a straight government of Manipur enterprise. That's what I'm saying. Because Chawba's arrest, his stripping of the union membership, and ultimately being denied his press identity card issued by the DIPR government of Manipur, cannot be looked into isolation. It has to be looked into a composite. Holistic whole.
Okay. Well, see, the union or probably the authority might have their own side of story of, why the membership has been withdrawn or why the DFR card has been, cancelled and all those things. But yes, so to say, we are really not, convinced with the action, taken up by the authority or the union just after the release of Paujal Chawba from the detention. So it has to be, again, looked upon and then introvert. Think about what should a union of journalists should do when a journalist is detained, and that too arbitrarily by the police. Okay, we will now take a short break here. After the break, we will continue with this discussion, and of course, we'll go to Geeta and Tilman and ask them what is the way forward from here, because we cannot just keep quiet and then see things go by. So we have to stand up and do something. So we will try to gather the suggestions and inputs from the panelists again, and then we'll be back just after this break. Welcome back from the break. Ladies and gentlemen, you're watching the special edition of Kanasi Nainasi, brought to you by the Frontier Manipur in association with Seven Salai. After the break, the first question is for Tamul Bablu. Tamul Bablu, in the present context, there is a serious allegation that the freedom of expression and speech are being challenged unprecedentedly in Manipur. How do you feel about it? What's your take on that?
Lave had mentioned, where the present Honorable Chief Minister, Mr. N. Biren, was then an editor of Naharolgi Thaudang, one of the daily newspaper, and he was arrested along with Mr. A veteran octogenarian social worker called Iboyaima, because Iboyaima was talking about how Manipur can regain its independence under international law, because it was whatever, forcibly annexed, whatever, and that was printed in Naharolgi Thaudang, and the two of them were arrested under charges of sedition. At that time also, Human Rights Alert was very young, and that was the first time I got my first handycam from witness program of the Lawyers Committee on Human Rights in New York. So even as he was coming out from the police van and taken inside Chairap Court, we were filming that, and we did a huge campaign around that. Then I think the next big case of clamping sedition on someone who is professionally doing their work, I think your case came about, wherein you were arrested and granted bail for some time, and then re-arrested again and clamped under the preventive detention law of the National Security Act. There again, we did a lot of campaign, and we even reported it with the UN Special Rapporteur on freedom of opinion and expression, and he also intervened, saying that this act of arbitrary detention of a journalist for posting something in Facebook is a violation of international law, and therefore that needs to be lifted. After a huge campaign again, I'm really glad that you're here anchoring the whole process and doing that. So similarly, there was this case of V1, who was also clamped under a student leader from Delhi, who had posted something in the Facebook and clamped under sedition law. Again, the court was magnanimous enough and understood the whole game plan, and he was released. And then the recent episode of Pauzial Chauba and Dhiren, your own executive editor and the editor-in-chief, where, I mean, I don't know what exactly is the status, because apparently now they are not formally arrested. Even though they were taken to the police custody, they were made to spend the night in the police custody, but they were never brought out into the court. And therefore, was it an arrest? Technically not. So it's clearly another case of arbitrary detention.
Exactly.
So these things are happening time and again. These are big episodes where well-known, well-established journalists are arrested. But there are also many other instances where just randomly young people expressing themselves, expressing their opinion, who are critical of the government, are always would have to land up in the cooler in the police station the whole night. This has been recurring over and over again. But what is the irony or the paradox today is this is happening in a regime which is where the head of the state himself was a victim of seditious law 20 years ago. And the civil society, the human rights community had to invest so much energy to get him released and then finally, stitch into politics, and now he is the chief minister. But sometimes they say doctor makes the worst patient, He being a journalist himself, we expected a certain level of, a certain standard of, respecting journalists and journalism. But what we are seeing today is exactly what Tamal Labo was also saying. AMJU, which is supposed to be a union of working journalists protecting the journalists' interests, have now become a government of Manipur undertaking. In human rights parlance, very often this happens. When we were doing work in the human rights in the United Nations, for example, when the civil society becomes very critical of their own government started organizing fake civil society organizations and talking the same language. And there is a specific term from NGO, they have become GONGO, government organized non-governmental organization. So the very purpose of non-governmental organization is lost because they are basically articulating the voice of the government. So they become basically, rather than a civil society who is putting forward the interests of a certain community who are vulnerable because of their profession, now there is a clear co-option of this unions where by giving all kinds of perks and privileges. So it's not a healthy sign. On the surface, of course, there are no big protest or rally that comes out, but this is not a positive piece. This is a negative piece because you are undercutting the need of the people, you are undercutting the genuine expression of people's dissent, anger, whatever, and you are suppressing them and trying to put them under the carpet. It will explode one day.
Okay.
I mean, I heard there are a lot of debate now within Amju community as well on the position that needs to be taken when somebody is arrested. So these things are bound to come up more and more if civil society space is not respected for what they are. Rather, if there is an effort from the state to control them and to on the one hand, you have this carrot and stick policy. On the one hand, you incentivize those journalists who are conforming to the official line. And on the other hand, you are putting a lot of pressure on people who are not conforming to the official line. So it's no longer freedom of expression. It now, as I was telling you earlier, it has now become a freedom to conform to the government line. And this will not be healthy in the long run. And unless and until we the government needs to restrain themselves and let the journalist circle, work free and independent of these kind of government pressures. Only then will the genuine issues of the people will be thrown up to the public, which is what journalism is all about, and we will be able to have a peaceful society, which is a positive peace where people can enjoy their right and enjoy have also a peaceful life. Whereas now we are seeing a negative peace where there's so much of pressure that nobody is able to speak out, including the journalists themselves.
Exactly.
So in the long run, it will explode one day, and before it explodes, I think it is time that we start debating, discussing, and exposing this kind of hidden politics which is playing within the journalist fraternity in Manipur today.
Okay, I really love the last sentence, the last line to be precise, when you are asking to try and start thinking from today, otherwise it will be too late, because it is not just the innocent people, but even the journalists are not allowed to speak. If you are not allowed to speak, then of course the society will never flourish at all, because healthy argument is very much necessary for a society to flourish. So that's where Tamo Bablu wanted to point it out. Well, my next question is for Editor-in-Chief of the Frontier Manipur. Tamo, you have just come out of the crisis. What is your learning from the crisis, and how do you take your endeavor forward learning from this crisis?
Casey, I don't want to call it a crisis as of now. Why I don't want to call it a crisis is perhaps it is an opportunity for all of us, to learn the lesson and to march forward. Because the moment you term it a crisis, there's a tendency to look it from a very discouraging point of view. But for me, this crisis is an opportunity in itself, because here we can come back with more courageous and also more strident in our voices. However, said, what we have to remind ourselves is that in recent years, what is to be worried is that citizens have witnessed the shrinking space, a shrinking of democratic space, leading to near total marginalization and silencing of civil society and the media. So it's not only the media that that we are worried of. The civil society itself also is facing lots of crisis as far as repression and suppression of the regimes are on. And due to severe repression, civil society organizations and media are encountering what I understand as strangulating challenges. Actually, they have been literally strangulated, strangulating challenges. And there have been also reports of civil society activists and media professionals being violently attacked, imprisoned, or forced to remain silent. And that we know very well. and clearly. And I think Mr. Tillman also had given certain stats about from the reporters beyond beyond borders. So we know all those facts and figures. The unprecedented increase in the cases of outright repression, not only in authoritarian countries, but also in liberal states, has in fact forced credible democratic agencies to reduce ourselves to nothing. But the moment when you start treating this as a crisis, we are not trying to reduce this to nothing, but let it be an opportunity for arming ourselves with better knowledge and also with better strategy to march forward in this in a very democratic and credible way. And one more thing I want to emphasize and I want to put across for our viewers as well as for everyone here is the cases of repression, is honestly even more starker. It's very clear in geopolitical frontiers. When I say geopolitical frontiers is when there are areas where political governance is at the periphery, okay, and peripheral regions of certain so-called mainstream. And these peripheries are primarily populated by marginalized people with different race, culture, and historical roots. And this alarming trend calls for certain dispassionate scrutiny of the current state of affairs so as to understand the nature and causes of repression of civil society and the media in a deeper level. And I think this will help us to identify the causes of the shrinking democratic space and for us to clearly determine achievable achievable goals through our own strategies by the democratic agents. And for me, last but not the least, is that freedom of expression, as we all know, has long been considered a fundamental right in almost all countries of the world, particularly in liberal democracies. The liberty to speak one's opinion traditionally has been viewed as the pathway to the search for the truth and a critical element of pursuing, the happiness or welfare of each and every one of us. There are different postmodernist takes and post-truth takes onto journalism and the media, but for what matters to me is, again, I would emphasize it again, it's an inalienable rights that every human being are to be I mean their views, every views and opinions of every human being should be respected, and they should be given enough space to exist and to grow, so that we achieve or we pursue a rich and fulfilled life. I think that's all that I need to put across today.
Okay. Thank you, Tamodin.
Well, the next question is for Geeta. Geeta, yes, we have read the whole scenario now. What is your opinion on the way forward?
About the way forward, I think it's at the moment very grim because there is such a range of attacks. In this year alone, we have seen journalists being hauled up for sedition. We've seen journalists being jailed. We've seen journalists who have been charged under very serious charges, including 353 and obstruction of public servant and all of the other. So we've got the editor of Shillong Times, for instance, who has filed a special leave petition against the possible, arrest and criminal proceedings against her for a Facebook post. So we've had the stand-up comedy artist who is stuck in jail in Madhya Pradesh. So the way forward would really be to deal with all these levels of attacks, whether they are direct physical attacks or the kind of stalking that and break-in that another journalist in Delhi faced. So, so the threats are many. The threats are from different directions. The response also has to be from in different manner, depending on the nature of the threat. So it becomes very important for all of us to understand how to deal with the law. We have to understand how we can fight within the contours of the law, and we need to develop much stronger networks and raise a much larger voice, bigger voice on these attacks. If we keep silent, or if we are intimidated into silence, we will not be able to see any freedom of expression left for us. So we'll have to keep resisting, we'll have to keep raising that voice, and we'll have to keep fighting.
Last question to Tillman. Tillman, there is a situation here wherein some people are arrested and even slapped with sedition charge, Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, even for a mere Facebook post or comments. On the other hand, some people caught with arms are set free. There are no investigation by any investigation agency in such cases. What do you feel? What is your opinion about the differential application of law to different sets of people?
That's a very difficult question for me. I have been in Manipur once, but I'm not so familiar to really be able to make a distinction why in one case the law is applicated, in the other it is not. How you planted to me the problem, it seems to me not coherent how the law is applicated. So, but what sort of reasons and motivations are behind that, I can't answer. But obviously the law should be the same for everybody. So, and the liberties guaranteed by the Constitution should be for everybody. Although I guess that's the main problem in your region. If you have
No,
is it
exactly.
still martial law there, or is it still?
No, there is no martial law.
Not anymore. No, it's but it's a special state of security there. So it's
Okay.
always situations where it might get difficult for journalists.
Okay.
The problem is, what should have been the proper response? Okay, I understand that they should have actually condemned the arrest and then, of course, pursue the case, whatsoever it is. But that's not something that we have seen in the recent case as well. So where do you think went wrong with the concept, with the objective, with the functionality of the Union of Journalists?
I call the old school. The old school is, I was never trained as a journalist. I'm an economist by training. I'm from the Delhi School of Economics. I don't even have a week's training in journalism. Okay. I call myself, I was trained in economics in Delhi University, but journalism I learned it on the streets of Calcutta. So that's when my first article got published in the Sunday magazine. So I went and met an old colleague of mine. I still remember Pranjoy Guhatar Gupta, who is now the editor of the Economic and Political Weekly, and he was very recently under Citizens Charge also.
Okay.
Okay, now, I mean, he's like my tutor in journalism, and I walked the streets of Calcutta to win and get my article tightened with him. Okay. Now, we always followed a small dictum. What are we here for? Okay. We are here to report things as we see, not as we feel. Huh? That feeling is entitled to you in the last paragraph of your article.
Okay.
However, this, according to informed sources, it is fair like that. That every good editor permits you to do that. Okay. Now, I think what went wrong is the fact that our young set of journalists, they are media savvy. they're mobile savvy, they're computer savvy. They're trained, many of them are trained journalists. Many of them have worked in major broadcast companies across India. They have come here, but the fundamental ethos, as I said, of being the fourth estate of the society, of the state, seems to be lacking in them. They think it's a way, means to compete with, say, doctors and engineers in terms of garnering money, in terms of gathering wealth. And as a journalist, you definitely have access. As a president of the All Manipur Working Journalists Union, you will definitely have access to the chief minister, right? I also had access to the chief minister, I also had access to the governor, but I knew where to draw the line. Okay. The Ram Rekha line has to be, Ram Lakshman, the Lakshman Rekha line has to be drawn, you see. So far, and not more than that. Okay. I used to go and visit the governor at night at 8 o'clock, but sometimes I would go behind the kitchen, but never one day would I escape going through the security channel. Okay. Now, that is when you have to decide for yourself, what are we here for? I recollect in late 90s when the Imphal Free Press was established, I ran a weekly column called Acute Angle, in which I used to target ministers and bureaucrats and write on social evils, you see. I was not liked, I was feared, and I was respected. Okay. Now, this respect I recollect on two accounts. One was when, just before the National Games was there, the sports minister, I won't name him, threw the file at his commissioner's face, because the minister wanted the contract for mattress to be given to a particular firm, whereas the commissioner says, no, this is going to be in Manipur's window to the world, to the rest of the country. We should call for a firm, particular firm, with a reputed firm. And then, prior to that, I had written 2 articles on him. See, he also ran an NGO. So, as the secretary of the NGO, he would put an application to the director of Youth Affairs and Sports. The director would then put up the same file to him as minister for his administrative approval, you see. It's like me applying to myself through you, and you are putting up the file to me for my approval, okay. Now, finally, when if I was to write, I was about to write that, then I got a call from him in the evening. He said, Tamu, who is this? I'm so-and-so. Who so-and-so? He said, I'm Minister so-and-so. So, what's the problem? He said, Tamu, I cannot go to sleep now these days. You see, why? Because I'm not sure what are you to write against me tomorrow.
Okay. So, in short, the principle that which we need to follow is, left behind.
Compromise.
Yeah, you compromise.
It's compromise. It was never there in the first case. I mean, journalism, you have to have ethics. Nah?
Exactly.
I mean, I also have my ethics. I wrote an article, an ambush by the Nagana ground on an army column, and the major was killed. And I got a call from Lemako. He said, sir, could you withhold the name of the major because his wife is expecting a child and we have not officially informed her as yet, and it will be shocking for her to receive the news through the newspaper. Yeah. So I deleted his name.
Sorry to interrupt, Tamla, but yes, you have actually answered my question that what went wrong is the compromise of the principle of the foundation.
Yeah.
So that's the problem there. Now let me come to Tamu Babu once again. In the recent incident where the chief editor of the Frontier Manipur and then the executive editor were detained, although there is a clarification from the authority side that it was never an arrest. However, they spent at the station, I should say, Pawnee Chawla spent there more than 24 hours. And unfortunately, they were not produced before the court. So now my question is there a possibility that a person or an authority is, actually grabbing hold, branches of the democracy, like the judiciary also, the executive power also, the legislative power also? Who should be held responsible for this kind of arbitrary detention? Or where should we, not?
Absolutely. It's a fundamental right of every citizen that if you are arrested, that within 24 hours you should be brought before a magistrate so that the magistrate have to examine the grounds on which you were arrested. Whereas in the Paujal Chauba's case, it is clear that he was called from early in the morning, and then he was released the next day, much later than that. So more than 24 hours he spent in the police custody. If this was a state governed by the rule of law and the Constitution of India, then clearly it is a violation of their fundamental rights. So he was arbitrarily detained. And even though in India it is not practiced much, under the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, if you are arbitrarily detained, then there should be mandatory compensation for these kind of arbitrary detention. Whereas in the context of Manipur today, very unfortunately, the rule of law seems to have into the window, and the power of the executive, the legislature, as well as the executive seems to be concentrated to a few hands. So this is not exactly a rule of law situation that we are seeing. This is what we call rule by law, using law as an instrument to beat down on people who are having an opinion or which is different from the one that the regime is taking. So I think this kind of very arbitrary exercise of power beyond the constitutional bounds, beyond the rule of law parameter, needs to be condemned by every right-thinking people, and I think this needs to be talked about. Unfortunately, the people who were most vocal, 10 years ago from now, the journalist fraternity themselves seems to be so heavily compromised that these things are not being written. It is important that the most important kind of factor that controls the behavior of our government is the sunlight of the media. The media glare is what is required to ensure that the power is not abused. But when that glare itself is dimming, then it gives ample scope for the abuse of power. This is a very unfortunate situation. We were hoping a lot from the present regime that when they first came to power, they would be different from the earlier regimes, because it was, after all, headed by a very senior journalist who himself went and did a lot of this. I still remember the byline of Naharwalgi Thaudang, which was written a newspaper dedicated to the cause of human rights. I mean, as human rights activists, now we wonder we feel a little ashamed that the very people who had once espoused freedom of opinion and expression, who was once a victim himself when he expresses opinion which was different from the government, today they are in the helm of power, and they themselves have gone so low in terms of the standard of their behavior that today we are finding the democratic space in Manipur is dwindling every passing day. This is very unfortunate, and I really appreciate people like yourself, few journalists who are standing up, the Frontier Manipur, who is trying to stand up and fight it back. I think there's no golden road for us to travel. I think the democratic space has to be fought and won, and it is important that at least there are few people like yourself, the Frontier people, and also there are many people within AMJU itself, which is very uncomfortable with the way in which the standard of media in Manipur is going down. We were proud some time ago that the big corporate media are being bought off, but the smaller medias in India, and including the media in Manipur, was standing up for values and principles. It is very saddening to see that there is an erosion of this, and I think that kind of an erosion needs to be checked, and that can be checked only by asserting the values and principles time and again, and the public at large is there to and at the end of the day, when as they say, when the going gets tough, the tough gets going, when the situation is getting, darker and darker, I think whatever little light is there becomes brighter and brighter. And I think that way, the light that Frontier is kindling, the light that people like yourself are kindling, I think the challenge for us now today is how to ensure that this light is protected, this light is nurtured so that it will slowly spread out again and cover the darkness. The darkness needs to be fought with this little light that is there. And I'm really glad that at least there are a few people, even in these very dark times, to stand up for truth, to speak the truth to the power. It is not easy, but nonetheless, the very fact that it is still there is something for us to celebrate and nurture.
Very good point, very valid and good point there. In fact, yes, it is often said that, of course, journalism is not a crime at all. Disseminating news or information to the masses is not at all a crime. So there is no room of, harassing those people. Now, of course, it's been more than an hour, so I'll just try to wrap up. One last question to each of you who are with me here in the studio. So, first thing, let me just ask this question to Tamo Bablu. That opinion on the trend of concentration of power in Manipur, much against the ideals of separations of power in democracy, and the threat it poses to the people of Manipur today and her future. What would you like to say about the trend of concentration of power in Manipur?
Well, it's very alarming, no doubt about it. We see many people are now questioning even the independence of judiciary, whether we have institutions, whether we have courts who are able to give judgments which are opposing to the present regime is an issue that many people are quietly questioning. The role of the legislature has become minimal. The way in which our assemblies are functioning, we are not seeing any genuine debates on issues, whether this, not just the legislatures, but our own legislatures who are elected representatives also being bullied and intimidated. The level of seriousness with which the public issues which are being talked about outside of the assembly are discussed inside the assembly is also very seriously questioned today. We see a gradual concentration of power to a few people, and if you see the present debate around the drug trafficking and the trial where people's expectation of the court have gone so low, the average mood in the street today is that now Manipur is basically run by a few people and a few families rather than a genuine separation of power of the executive, legislature and the judiciary. I honestly hope that I'm wrong, and I'll be the happiest person if this is, I am proved to be wrong. But today, the mood of the people in the street is that we are not in a functioning democracy, rather we are in an autocratic rule where there's so much of concentration of power and the institutions are not able to function the way it should have been functioning in a democratic country. I hope this trend is reversed, and I hope that the people who are in the helm of the institutions prove me to be wrong. But if this trend continues, then it will be a catastrophic future for us in a highly sensitive state like Manipur, as you have called a frontier. The quality of democracy has gone very, very low, and I think we have to start by respecting the fourth estate. journalism should be made free. Journalism should be allowed to function as a watchdog of the rest of the pillars of the democracy. If journalism is not free, I think the rest of the three estates, the executive, legislature, and the judiciary would also be in various forms of pressure. So I think for me, the critical point is that there should be free media, there should be free debate and discussions within the public, and that space, that democratic space, has to be respected by the power that be.
Okay, but Tamo, I just like to know one more thing, that is there a possibility of enacting a stringent, a very specific law for the journalist community?
Well, law helps, but as I was telling you, law alone is not going to be of much help, because the way in which it is implemented, if it is a situation where rule of law is respected as principle by everybody, we all bow down to law, then a good law will help. And for that matter, there's no dearth of good law in India. India is a country with lots of laws. I mean, there is even a working journalist report that our former Justice R.K. Manishana have written. Many of the recommendations are implemented, but the critical point is not new law. The critical point is the integrity of the people who are running the institutions. Unless and until that integrity is established, and unless and until this feedback of any system, for it to function properly, needs a feedback from the people who is at the bottom of that hierarchy. As they say, it is only when the wearer of a shoe will know where the shoe pinches. So there has to be a feedback mechanism for the people, the public, the affected communities to be able to raise their voice and say, this is where things are wrong. If you muzzle the voice of the people who are affected by policies and programs of the government, then obviously, no matter how the law is good in paper, in reality, it'll not work. So it will be nice to see if we need a new law, but my understanding is it's not new law, but the proper functioning of the institutions of the media, being the fourth estate, and all the three estates of the government, the executive, legislature, and the judiciary, which is critical. And unfortunately, today we are seeing that all this power seems to be concentrated to a few people and their families.
Exactly. That's what we are really, really concerned about, the concentration of power to certain, people. Yes, let me just conclude this, panel discussion with a question to Tamo Lava. You being a senior journalist, what would you like to tell to the young journalists, of today on how to rise above the challenges the journalists face?
Okay, all that I would like to tell my younger friends, I mean, they're all colleagues, irrespective of the ages difference, okay, is that you should be feared by whoever is committing wrongs. Not fear of physical threat, but fear that you will be writing and will doing justice, okay? And you also should also be respected to the extent that, okay, this man is a no-nonsense kind of a person, so don't kind of fool around with when he is around, okay? Now this is the main thing which I want to emphasize. It's all right for our young journalists to go and drink black dog with the ministers at night, but in the morning they should at least have a semblance of the 5,000 rupees a bottle drink you've had. Instead, they come out right white dog, which is the local equivalent of Sakmai, or which is just 100 rupees a bottle, you see. Now, when I was in my tiger riding days, I used to call it, okay, ministers used to come and see me in my office. I never used to go and see them. Okay. Now, that is the situation in which I was running my little bit of office in Pauna Bazaar. And one day I received a visitor. Listen, there was a lottery scam which I had unearthed. The government of Manipur was unable to pay GPF to his employees because of a lack of funds in the state kitty. Then the finance minister said he is going to waive off about 2 crores rupees to 3 lottery agents. Now I said, how can you do this? So I did that, I kept on exposing, but then finally I remember it was Ozan Nipamsa who was the chief minister. He formed a cabinet subcommittee to look into the lottery scam. Then one day I recollect former speaker and now MLA, my friend T.N. Hauke, who was also a journalist, came to me and said, boss, can you give me the file which you have in you? Because I maintain a parallel file. I used to steal the government files, take Xerox copy and keep that file with me and return a file back. You say, that's a kind of a, that's, my journalism ethics allows that. I mean, your source of information, how you procure it is something, it's up to you. Now, I said, what happened to your government file? So the minister concerned has burnt the file. Can you imagine a situation in which the minister burns his own files? When the owner of the house steals his things from his own house. Okay. Now, but what I'm worried now is our honorable leader of the state. Okay. He was such a fine journalist. He was also a man of mettle and determination. We were together in non-journalistic activities like taking part in a track 2 meeting with civil Naga leaders that took place in Kaziranga. And then when he became chief minister, I realized that he was taking orders from Nagpur of the Saffron Brigade. That was apparent when he went to Madhapur. I'll just finish. Okay. Now, but now it appears that he's taking orders from Chandel. Okay. Now, does News Daily know all this, or does he have sanction from Amit Shah or Sri Modi, or is he acting on the dictates and interests of Chandel? I have nothing personal against him. His coming in was a whip of good change, and we all welcome him. We welcome the change, but apparently, as I said earlier, the metamorphosis has taken place, and it is time for that metamorphosis to come to a halt for the betterment of the state and for the people. We like to breathe fresh air. You see, everybody wants to breathe fresh air, and the threat that if you post something nice or something wrong against a Sarkar on Facebook itself, you are liable to be arrested and thrown behind bars is something which not many people would like to have in their mind. No? So that's it. Okay.
Exactly. Well, there are a lot of things that we would like to know, especially from Geeta and Tillman, but unfortunately, due to the technical glitch, we are not able to, put forward the question that we wanted to ask and, suggestions or the inputs that we might get from them. The inconvenience is deeply regretted. In the next episode, we will try to, bring up to the mark and then try to satisfy our viewers. We really understand that, of course, the viewers are not really happy with the sound problem, especially with the panelists from outside the city. So we will try to improve this in our next episode, and of course, we get into the crux of the issues that we have in our state and across. And then, of course, as a conclusion, I just want to mention one thing that, of course, no prison can, no prison is big enough to contain freedom of speech. So it is really, really disturbing. This is really alarming to see that a lot of journalists are being booked under different, sections of IPC, even detained, even arrested, even harassed. This is something that we would not like to see in a healthy democracy. So for a democratic setup to flourish healthily, we need to have the courage to listen to the distant-voiced. We need to have the courage to listen to the opposing thoughts, so that there is a healthy argument, so that there is a healthy competition, and probably the society is flourished. So my last word again is no prison is big enough to contain the freedom of speech. I really thank Tillman from Germany and also Geeta Seshu for joining us, and of course giving your inputs. But yes, we couldn't be up to the mark and then get all those information that we would like to garner from you. Sorry for that, but yes, we will make sure that in our next interaction we have all these problems solved, and then of course we get to listen to your inputs more in the future. Thank you so very much to both of you joining from different part of the world through Zoom. Thanks to Tamulaba for your inputs and time. Thank you to Tamu Bablu as well, and then thanks to the chief editor Tamu Thiren as well. Thank you, viewers. We will try to bring a very hot topic